All right, so good morning or noon and welcome back. I feel like it's been so long since I've done a live class. I'm really excited to be coming back to it and looking at this piece today, which is one of my favorites, actually. So, yeah, I know that these recordings will eventually be watched by honor students up next semester. If you are an honors student, I have actually already opened up and unlocked that section of the course in OMHS. You'll probably have to click on semester 2 when you look through the modules, and you can scroll down to the honors level, and I've opened up those assignments so that, as I said, I made my promise to you guys months ago. Gosh, it was back in November. That you guys will be able to look over it earlier, and should there be a lull and you want to get in everything sooner, that's fine. But I just wanted you guys to see it. Okay, so back to Art History Tuesday. So, what is the cultural significance of relics? So relics is a word that we use here and there, but I think a lot of people have forgotten the meaning of. Preserved pieces of the past, right. So preserved pieces of the past. So why do cultures hold on to relics? Yeah, reminders of events and people who came before, absolutely. So because it's just me and you today, Elizabeth, I'll let you choose two and I'll do the other. These are different lines pointing to different sections of what we're looking at. And it's mainly a subject or a material, but you take two that you feel confident with, that you know what it is or what it's made out of, and I'll take the empty one. Yes, Christ on the cross. On the cross. And then our super designs, right. Not just any metal, but can you guess what kind of metal they used? You know, the picture never does it justice. Gold, right, so it's very expensive. The last one down here are actual gems and jewels. So looking at this book, first things first, we can already tell the religion, right? Yeah, so we're looking at early Christian or Catholic in particular. But at this time, we're looking at about, I think, 1,000 to 1,500. This is medieval, for sure. So it's a very old book from the Christian religion. What do we think is inside of it? Bible, right? Bible, or at least a section of the Bible, some stories as well. And based on the materials used, do you think this was worth a lot? Yeah. This book is considered a national treasure in both Ireland and Scotland. So there's actually a national fight over who really owns this. And this is considered one of the most famous books in the world. And it's not just any Bible, but we'll dive in. Do you have any questions that are burning to you about this piece that I should start off with? Okay, cool. So I will dive right into our story today. I'm going to have some tea. So, haven't used the video in a while. Hi. Okay. So today, since we are in the British Isles, I have made myself an Earl Grey tea, and I actually have like a frother now. So it has that beautiful foam on top, and I mixed in some lavender syrup, which is a very, I think, appropriate taste level. And I actually even have, I don't know if you can see, I have some honey on the top that I took a chopstick and moved around a spiral. So, very yummy. I'm proud of myself, getting gourmet over here. So this is the Book of Kells, and I'll write it right here because most people, Kells. So the Book of Kells is considered one of the most famous physical books in the world. So there are books like the Bible and the Quran that have been, there's an uncountable amount of prints and stuff of that book. This is a specific Bible. So there are not many copies of the Book of Kells. There's only one. And it is today still hosted at Trinity College, which is in Dublin, Ireland. And that's where it is hosted. But Scotland still has a major claim to it. And this all starts, before I dive in, have you ever seen the movie Brandon and the Secret of Kells? No, okay. So I will link that to you later on for future purposes. That's actually an animated movie made by an Irish and French cinema or animation company that actually tells a little bit of the story about the origin of the book. Anyway, so diving into this book is not only famous, it actually has a legendary story of how it's moved around. The pages inside are not the original pages. They're still medieval pages, but they were at one point ripped out, and the cover was taken. No, I got it backwards. Pages are original. Cover was actually stolen off of the front of the book. So this is a second cover. So the pages are original, and then the cover has been recreated. Exactly. It was taken by Norse raiders who particularly attacked mostly monasteries, actually, because monasteries were gold mines. People would come and pay religious tribute to a monastery, giving them money and gold, and yet none of the monks were trained to protect themselves, so there was no warrior monks in the British culture. Most lived rather peacefully. So it's the best bank robbery ever, if you think. Not only do they have a huge amount of money because of tributes, but they also can't even protect the money, which is a whole nother thing right there I can get into. This book also is not only a relic itself, but has a relic inside it. I believe it is inside the spine of the book. So we know that relics are something of the past. What are they in particular for maybe Christianity, a Christian religion? What kind of relic can you get? Bones of saints, exactly. There is the bone of a saint in the spine of the book. And this is still a common thing you can get. There are not only bones of saints are relics, but sometimes clothing or items of certain saints are also considered relics. There is essentially an eBay of relics that is used in the Catholic Church, or like a catalog. And that's often what churches will save up money for, to buy themselves a relic to go inside a cross or something. And this comes from the old school practice, which some still do today, called a pilgrimage. So originally, a pilgrimage is always going to a sacred site, but sometimes that sacred site is also a physical thing. So people would actually come and travel to see this book in medieval Ireland. even if people couldn't read, because it had the bones of a saint inside. And the pages themselves, what do you think they were made out of at this time? Skin, right. So in particular, the one animal they always have in abundance in Ireland and Scotland are sheep. So sheepskin would, after a sheep had served their purpose to the community, provided years of wool and things like that, as they're starting to age, they'd use all parts of the animal. And this is still considered like a traditional practice today. If you go to a craft store, you can often find pamphlets of parchment. But that parchment now is made from actual paper pulp fibers. Originally, parchment was skinned sheep that was stretched and then essentially shaved or combed until it got really, really like paper thin. It had to be translucent against the light. And who created parchment? Who actually wrote these books, and who actually created the books in general? What is that person? Scribes, but particularly monks, actually. So this was a part of their job. It's interesting because you're right, scribes is a secular word for it, but many monks were trained as scribes. And you can actually even find inside a lot of books where they've annotated or written little messages inside. But based on your role in the church, and once you joined this community, this brotherhood, people would get different jobs, and that's what you focused your life on for decades of time. You became so good at that because you've given up every other thing in your life, right? So I'll actually say in the early, it wasn't until after 500 AD that monks had to give up everything. So in the beginning, when Christianity came into Britain, the monks and priests lived very similar to the Jewish community with rabbis. And what is a rabbi allowed to do now that a priest in Catholicism cannot do? Eventually the priest had to give up something when you joined and got to the level of being a priest. Marriage, right. So a rabbi in Jewish faith can marry, have children, be a community member, whereas the priests in the Catholic faith, they had to start giving that up at around 500 AD. So Christianity had been in function for over 500 years before this marriage rule came into play. Not only marriage, but also celibacy. But interestingly enough, because Ireland and Scotland were so remote, they were the last ones to follow that rule, to the point that they would say messengers would come to these different monasteries, and the monasteries would say, oh, they never arrived, for 200 years. So for 200 years longer, Ireland and Scotland, their priests were able to still marry. So around 700 AD, they finally, the church cracked down on them, and they had to play along with everybody else. That's a little bit of funny history for you right there. So traveling into that thing, you became, because you took away all other distractions in your life, so you became really good at a select few things in your brotherhood community. So there would be a parchment maker group of monks whose whole job was to skin the sheep and then to tan the hide to make it really thin. And then there were monks who then did the illuminated manuscript. They painted, they drew, they used precious metals. There were monks that worked with just metal and made things like the covers. So they were sort of like a very slow-moving book factory. And they would churn out, maybe one book with everyone's collaborative effort after a year. So it took quite a lot of time for that to happen. So this book has literally countless amounts of man hours involved in creating every little piece, and it was all meant to be a spectacle in worship. So people were supposed to travel around and see the book, or maybe these monks would leave the island and travel around with the book, and people would marvel at its beauty. And that was one other way of essentially a mission. So it was one other way of spreading a faith in a land that at that time was still about 50% pagan. So they still followed old gods. So this was a big thing to sort of recruit for. It's hard for us to think of this now, but Christianity was a new faith at this point. Yeah. So this book, because of its worth, it had been stolen by raiders, Viking Norse raiders. At one point, it was even stolen by pirates as well, not raiders, but it was stolen again later on in life. And so the people making this book, monks, actually had to move around a lot. This book had to be hidden. So it actually started off the Isle of Iona in Scotland, is where it began, and then it ended in Ireland. So these monks had to travel around, which is why Ireland claims ownership to it now, because that's where it ended, even though it technically began in Scotland. So that's why this fight still exists between two nations. But Ireland has it. They own it now, and they're not going to give it up, I'm sure. Okay. So this book is still super gorgeous today. I totally recommend that you look in detail into it, which is what will take us to the next slide. I remember when this project came out. If you click on that second link there, that hyperlink, it'll take you to, what do you mean not reachable? Let me put it in the chat box. See if that will now take us there. Okay, so this is the digital collections. They actually got permission and very delicately did high resolution scans of every page from the Book of Kells. So that image I showed you in the beginning is just at the outside. But you can see each individual piece. Now, one thing that's cool from that animation I told you about earlier, Brandon and the Secret of Kells, I'll type it right here before I forget. So that's a movie. I think it might be on Netflix. You can often find it streaming for free in lots of places too. But Brandon and the Secret of Kells goes into little things like how the monks at this time would use what was called an oculus, but specifically a sort of crystal or stone so that they can magnify their vision and look closely at the pages. You can see the script on it is actually really quite tiny in all the levels of detail. And each page is an illuminated manuscript. An individual page they would call a folio. But clicking through here, you can see that they use incredibly tiny paint brushes. Some were just one single hair. And they had enough money in their community that each page had some sort of gold work painted on it. You should be able to click in and zoom in and really see the details just by double-clicking a section. Yeah, you're right. They had to kind of zoom in. And books, some books at this time, it wasn't unusual to find them to be as large as a table. This is about, like a coffee table size book size. But there are some books that are absolutely giant. and they would have individual pages open up for the worshipers to walk by and look closely. And there is a lot of cultural crossover at this point. So at the point that this book was made, let's see, Islam had arisen in the Arabic culture for a few hundred years now, and there's a lot of cultural crossover of early Christianity with mid Jewish culture and Islam. There's this sort of like nebulous period in which there is a lot in common, and how people treated books and learning and the words that were written were very similar. So just as Arabic is a sacred language in Islam, at this point Latin was considered the sacred language. And yeah, every story written at this time was also had to be written in Latin because that was the international language if you wanted anyone to see it. And also keep in mind that in the Middle Ages, Britain, so that's England, Scotland, and Ireland, were not treated as an educated place, but as a backward sort of country bumpkin sort of vibe. And even today, Europe has the similar vibes towards the British countries. We think of them as different because our forefathers in the U.S., land of barbarians. So our forefathers of the U.S. are in fact in Britain, at least in the Constitution. Anyway, but at this time in history, they were treated as super backwards, and everyone wanted to do like what they did in Rome. So Rome was still, even though the Roman Empire wasn't at the lead, the Catholic Empire was running, and so Latin was still the language of the intelligent. And actually, you weren't considered an educated man in the U.S. until, I guess, like late 1800s. You had to have mastered both Latin and Greek to be considered educated. That's only like 100 years ago that culture started to change. Okay, so our cultural canons. So what are some ways in which we see relics being used today? So I brought up our own nationalism in the U.S. Can you think of any relics that we really hold on to, maybe in terms of our own country? So not just in a religious point of view. Yeah, the Declaration of Independence, right? Have you ever seen it in person? Yeah. No. So you haven't seen it in person, but do you know anything about how they preserve it to make sure it doesn't fall apart? Somewhat. I feel like most people know about it from National Treasure, right? You just brought it up. So National Treasure definitely like glorifies it. That movie is a hoot. Oh, Nicolas Cage. So yeah, National Treasure glorifies it. If you want to look up that scene for those watching the video later on, but he has to take the Declaration of Independence out of a specific air-controlled vault. Some even say that you're not looking at the actual Declaration of Independence, but I think you are. The same thing as really special paintings around the world. So like the Mona Lisa is still stuck in an air vault, so you can see the glass and everything, but everything is super temperature controlled so that nothing can go wrong. And the same thing exists actually for the Book of Kells. it's also preserved as well because it's part of the cultural identity of Ireland in the same way that this is a part of the cultural identity of the U.S., this Declaration of Independence. Okay, so I attached this Wikipedia link up here in the top corner for you. This is a work made, I believe, or was found, I should say, in the 60s or 70s, and it's by the artist called St. James Hampden. So he called himself a saint. The name of this work that you're seeing right here is called Throne of the Third Heaven of the Nation's Millennium General Assembly. Now, a little bit about St. James. He's a more contemporary artist, but he was not employed as an artist. In fact, he spent his entire life as a janitor. And it's believed that he had collected shiny things, mostly foils and candy wrappers and found objects, and brought them home, and he had a garage. And he didn't have a car. So in the garage, he was building this sculpture, these sculptures, what some believe was for about 20 years, at least. He also had really intense writings. He essentially had to make his own Bible. Yeah, a very intense person. No one found this work until after he died. And I guess those family members were going through his property to find things. I believe he lived alone, so this might have been extended family. And they found this huge display. And from the writings that we saw, we believe that, yeah, it was truly shocking, right? And a person that no one would suspect anything, especially for the job that he was in, right? You know, that no one saw him really taking foils home because he was probably working in the evenings and nights to do his janitorial work, and not like it would be suspicious. And, you know, little did we know that he believed that there was going to be a new culture and a new global order that would arise out of the U.S., and he was preparing for that. So this is a throne, or like a throne room set up here. And if you can look up the image yourself if you want to copy that title, that big chunk of text over here in the upper left, and you can zoom in and see detailed stuff. But he would find like toys and plates and other things and cover them in these foils. And when I saw this for the first time, I didn't think that this could have been made from someone from the U.S. Do you have any cultures that you might have thought that this was from, or another part of the world? South America, Inca, the Maya, yeah, right? Some people even say like Tibet as well. There's an interesting crossover there. But it doesn't look like a man named James Hampden. I forget where what city he's from, but from the U.S. who like has a janitorial job. But you know, it's amazing what we don't know about people or what people want others to know. So looking at this work, I wanted to ask you in particular, what is he doing to evoke the concept of a relic or something spiritual, right? So this whole piece has been made out of trash. But do you think that it's a relic now? That's a good point. Do you think that he wanted people to find this work after he had died? It's a tricky question with things like this. Some people leave work to be found after they pass, and that's in a lot of movies and stories and such. But some people are just, pass before they ever intended to do something with it. That's a good point. That's probably why he was hiding it completely, right? And it's interesting how he himself saw himself as a saint or as a disciple of who was ever going to rise to power. Like, he didn't think that he was going to be the person that sits on that throne, but he was making that throne for whenever this uprising should happen. So this piece is still prized today as a part of African American folk art tradition, and it's really it's a treasure as well to see in person. But it's just a part of, this has now become a part of our national narrative when talking about spiritual artwork. So this artist is untrained in art. This is just entirely from his own invention. And took well over a couple of decades for him to create. So it's a very interesting piece to look at. Okay, so looking at the Book of Kells, if you can remember the description here, why don't I take the style and you take the process. We'll describe it for those who are watching this video later. Excellent. So great work for summarizing this up. Oh, the labor, gems, and jewels. I don't want to cut you off if you're still writing. Give me a check mark if you're ready to move on. Cool. All right, compare and contrast. I'll reach into our memory from the last time we had this and write for the right side. So I'll take the prow of a Norse ship if you want to take the Book of Kells. Ooh, a bit of inspiration. That's perfect. What's interesting too is that the same culture that stole the cover off of the original book also inspired the vine work and overlapping that was within the book. So the image to the right inevitably inspired the image to the left, which I think is interesting. Ooh, yeah. In a way, yeah, both are actually relics of the national history. So many people travel to Denmark and Norway specifically to see pieces like what you see to the right. That's a good point. All right. So you can give me a check if you're ready to move on. Excellent. All right. And how does this impact the art world? Oh, the book. Good point. Yeah. Do you think book artists still look to this work today? Yeah, they're definitely deeply inspired by it. Okay. And lastly, last slide of the day, how does this work impact you? I'll write something on here too. Yeah, I think also knowing that 100% of both of those pieces that you saw today, or all those pieces that you saw today, were made by hand. That's kind of empowering as well. To know that like my hands could make something cool too, like this. So in-depth and detailed and intricate. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to turn off the recording.